All right, here we go. Hey, Rod, how are you?
Hi, James. I'm pretty good. How are you?
Good. Good to see you again. It's been a little while since we had you on the coffee and software one, and we'll have Josh joining us at some point. But wanted to get going because you've been doing some great stuff on Embabel, and then wanted to get some updates on where all that's at since we last talked, and see any of the new cool stuff. So maybe for those just joining that aren't familiar with Embabel, I don't know, give us a little just background on what you're doing with Embabel, what it's for.
Embabel is an agent framework for the JVM. Reflects the fact that I think that the JVM has an absolutely crucial role to play in making enterprise Gen AI work. I guess if you're listening to this stream, you probably are already very open to that idea. But I think that is an idea that is going to be really, really big in 2026. And I totally agree with a lot of the stuff you've been saying, James, about the fact that Java and Gen AI is a really big deal. So, firstly, in Babel is in designed for the JVM. It builds on Spring, so it integrates beautifully with what the vast majority of enterprises using Java have in their tech stack. But it also introduces some ideas which I believe are novel across any agent framework and any platform. So I believe that the elephant in the room in terms of making enterprise Gen AI succeed is non-determinism. And you have to do everything you can to attack that. So in Babel attacks that in a couple of ways. Firstly, like any agent framework, it enables you to break up operations into smaller steps, where each step has got a smaller prompt which will execute more predictably. Reduced number of tools, so the LLM doesn't have to choose between 200 tools. But that's just part of it within Babel. The question is, how do you plan the orchestration of those steps? So, the obvious way to do it is use a state machine like LangGraph. You can use sequential execution like Crew AI. Those approaches work, but they tend to be fairly hard to evolve, right? Like you're defining a state machine up front. It's hard to rewire that state machine without a lot of code changes. And secondly, typical state machine implementations involve lots of magic strings. So, like if you look at LangGraph, it is, in my humble opinion, an utter disaster in terms of design because you're essentially having magic strings absolutely everywhere to drive transitions, say which methods define dynamic transitions. Embabel takes a different approach where we allow a choice of planning, and we in fact do have a state machine element that I'll talk to because that's fairly new. But the one of the big ideas behind Embabel is goal-oriented action planning. And it's this notion that you can increase the capabilities of your platform by deploying more actions and goals to it. So it's smart. I mean, it is a kind of AI. It's not an LLM. It's a kind of AI, but
Yeah,
it
and
is
that's
deterministic, which
and
is really key.
a lot of that comes out of like how you created with Spring this idea of people across a large organization, developers in a large organization, all being able to like contribute to a large complex system by adding their beans into this larger structure, and then they're being able to be like something that like organizes the life cycle and the path through a system across those beans and reusability of those beans. So like in the world of Embabel, those pieces that then get constructed into something larger you call actions. Is that, am I getting all that right so far?
Yeah, look, and I think it's a good point that there is a through line between the core design elements of Spring and Embabel. Like, I've always loved this idea of platforms that enable components to be wired together to collaborate to solve problems. Embabel is a bit more dynamic in the sense that the discovery is so you have the notion of actions and goals. You choose a goal, and the platform works out what path, what sequence of actions can get you to that goal. So, as opposed to other agent frameworks, That's really fundamentally different. This thing is a server. You can deploy more capabilities to it, and it's capable of doing more things or doing the same things in a smarter way.
And when you
Plus,
say choose a goal, there's two different ways that you can do that in Embabel. One is that you can actually programmatically decide which goal you want to achieve, but then the other one is you actually have a way to let Embabel decide, like, essentially, of all the things available, here's the goal that from a user prompt. Is that right? This is like, I forget what the name of it is in the API, but it's like some just like, give me a prompt and I'm going to find the goal that matches that prompt.
Yeah, that's autonomy
That's right,
in the
autonomy.
API. I mean,
Yep.
that is actually pretty cool for doing things like chatbots or, for a lot of our demos. In general, I think in the enterprise case, you should be choosing a goal. You should know what you want to do because, for a start, if you're choosing a goal using an LLM call, which autonomy has to do, you're not entirely deterministic. So that becomes an issue. We've
So it's
also
it's
introduced
it's
that.
non-deterministic on the goal selection, but once it's figured out what the goal is, or you've told it what the goal is, then it can deterministically plan across all the actions that can participate to achieve that goal.
Correct. So the plan of the steps that will get you to the goal is calculated on the preconditions and postconditions of those steps. So it uses an A star search. And that planning will be deterministic. Obviously, the execution of the entire process is not going to be 100% deterministic because you're probably going to have LLM calls for the majority of planned steps. But nevertheless, it's way closer to wholly deterministic than you get by, say, just having an agentic loop with a whole bunch of tools.
And then also easier for additional actions to be added and plugged into the system. And then you can write a test for what the planner, the GOAT planner,
Yeah.
then comes up with given a particular goal, and then all the actions that are available in a given system.
Yeah. Actually, it's important to mention here that one of the enhancements that we've made since we last spoke is in addition to GOAP, we provide another planner mode called Utility AI. Interestingly, as with GOAP, Utility AI comes via the gaming world. So GOAP is a very common algorithm for controlling AI characters in games. Utility AI is also. So actually, when I gave a keynote at Go to Copenhagen a couple of months ago, an attendee named Mark Rasmussen, who works for a bank in Denmark, pinged me on LinkedIn and said, "Have you considered using Utility AI?" And refreshed my memory on it, and it's actually a really good fit. So essentially, you can use exactly the same actions, but there is a crucial difference. Utility AI is deterministic, but it's about exploration. So at any point in time when the planner runs for a GOAT plan, the planner has to find a path to a goal, or it will say, it cannot find a plan. With utility, what the planner does is look at the present world state, which is defined in the same way, and say, I am going to execute the highest value action at this point in time. That value can be dynamic, and that's where the power of utility plan comes in. So actions have a value and cost. They can change. So when it executes, it may find that the value of an action has gone up or has gone down based on overall world state. But it just executes that first highest value action, and then it goes back and replans. That is very, very good for chatbots. It's very, very good for exploratory cases. So, for example, we're building a community management set of agents where when somebody raises an issue or a PR, steps happen. So, for example, in this case, you absolutely want things to be deterministic, so it's predictable, but you don't actually know what the final outcome might be. For example, what if this issue contains obscenity? Well, clearly you're just going to close it and that's it. There are not going to be any further steps. What if the issue is clearly AI generated slop? Again, but okay, what if the issue looks really, really interesting? Then you look at who raised that issue. You look at their GitHub profile, you see that they've got 25, high quality Java repositories. Then you get into more and more steps where you might want to do things like ping me in Discord to say, hey, you should reach out to this person. They're really interesting. They could be valuable as a member of the community. So it's this process of exploration.
If Josh files an issue on Embabel, that's gonna get you a text message in the middle of the night. So that's what we're aiming towards.
Yeah, there will be nowhere. Hi, Josh. There'll be nowhere to hide.
But that's the utility. That's the utility piece of the planner, is being able to actually use some logic to determine the planning step versus it being dependent on non executed logic. Is that?
No, the logic is still going to be controlled by the platform. So essentially, you write your actions the same way. With utility planning, you may also choose to write some dynamic cost code that can tell you what the cost and value of a particular action is. But the planner is still going to be responsible for saying, here's your platform, here are all the actions I know about. Obviously, we do support scoping, but here are all the actions you've let me know about or let me use. I'm going to choose the highest value action. So there's no like if then else or switch statement or anything like that in user code. And you can use the same actions with both planners.
Nice. But there is potentially some code that gets executed to determine that cost that then gets used by the planner, or?
So you can specify on any action where you have the add action annotation, you can provide a cost and a value as a constant. Since we added utility, we've also enabled you to specify a method that can return those values. And that means, for example, maybe, let's suppose one of your actions in an internal enterprise system is contacting a staff member. The cost of that outside their working hours should be dramatically higher, right? It should be a last resort. If there's anything else you can do. So those are the kind of things that utility. So let's suppose you've got a choice between, say, contacting a member of staff or doing a whole bunch of work across different databases that may do a huge amount of compute. During the day, it might be better to just contact the staff member. They might be able to do the search more efficiently. But if that person is out of the office and you don't want to disturb them when their kids at a baseball game, it might actually become cheaper to say, yeah, go and do all the compute you need to do. And that, with utility is modeled very, very naturally.
So that's cool that the utility, when you added the utility planner, you added the ability to calculate the cost function based on some user logic if they want to. Pre the utility planner, that was essentially a static value. It could be configured, but was not executing code to determine that cost.
And that also works with Go. Exactly. I mean, the beautiful thing is the programming model for actions is exactly the same. So there are certainly cases as well where dynamic cost and value make sense with Go.
Yeah. Well, that's cool that you utility planner was the second planner that you added, but I'm sure that you had at least somewhat architected Embabel to be able to change the planner, as a bean or some way to like configure that I want for this agent to use this planner. And you only had the Go planner last time we talked, and now you have a second planner. But I assume that there's maybe, if not today, the ability for people to plug in their own custom planner if they wanted to, or customize the Go planner or customize the new utility planner.
Yes, like as you would imagine, a key part, well, the key parts of how the framework works are exposed as beans and have clearly defined interfaces. So we differentiate between the API packages and the SPI. The SPI packages are not intended to be used by user code, so we don't guarantee the same level of stability, but they do provide the ability to add things like that.
Nice, cool. Well, that's great. Do you want to show the utility planner now? Would that be a good next step before we get into some of the other new stuff, or do you want to give us an overview first on all the new and exciting things?
You know what? Let's start off with another extension to planning, which is the state machine functionality. And then we will get to utility after that. So yeah, if we get that up on screen,
Yeah.
let's go for it. Okay, so can everyone say, right, so this is, if you've used our Java agent template, you may be familiar with the write and review agent. So that uses two LLM calls, one to write a story and another to review the story. So a user on our community Discord wanted to introduce human in the loop functionality into that. So finally, you're still going to have the LLM write the second LLM write the review, but you're going to be, as a user, able to say, revise this story before it comes fit for review. So that kind of thing where you've got essentially looping can be expressed in pure Go, but tends to be a little bit complex. So I did a lot of thinking about this and came up with an approach that essentially, I think, takes the good side of the state machine and mates it with Go. So there are certain things where you want explicit coded stateful flows within this context of a broader platform that can, gain more actions. So let's have a look at a variant of the write and review agent that handles the human in the loop. So firstly, I shall execute it. Again, we're using Spring Shell here. So, okay, what do we want a story about?
Josh and James at MCP night.
I wonder, we're going to be dealing with the knowledge cutoff here. We don't have any tools, so it may not know just how awesome.
We haven't plugged in the web search tool, so
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
A story about I don't know, Josh. What's an interesting story? We did for our Embabel workshop that we did about a month ago. We did it was like meeting preparation, but that's not a story.
No. Okay. Well, you know what?
We're not very creative. You're the creative.
No. Okay. I'm not tremendously creative here, but I'm going to write a story about Bay Bridge because I'm sure Josh.
That's a good one.
See it
it's like Josh. Josh is looking at the Bay Bridge right now.
Yeah. Exactly. So.
And just to caveat, we don't have any tools hooked up to this agent, so it's not able to do some things like fetch data about all the. Most of Josh and I stuff is like pulling in data from some other system through tools or whatever. But we're just
but I mean that is an explicit, obviously, decision that tools should be asked for. And if you need them, in this case, you don't typically need them to write a story. Okay, so at midnight, the Bay Bridge awakened. Its light flickers like, oh God, come on, get rid of the fireflies, for God's sake. I so hate the way LLMs write, I have to say.
So we're in this execution of this agent, and you told the agent that it could be essentially like human in the loop intercepted, allowing you to like see this draft and then provide some feedback back into the creation of the story before you go on to the review step.
So we're looking at this particular action, get feedback. So please provide feedback on the story, and it gives the story. So, okay, what do we think of this one? The Bay Bridge stirred to life. Oh God. Can't
it's very poetic.
Get rid of the poetic stuff. Write something in the style of Ernest Hemingway. That is matter of fact. Okay. Yes. Oh, much better. I don't know why, but that's actually pretty good. I have to say that in terms of famous writers, LLMs can nail Hemingway. His Hemingway is always so much better than any other writer.
I'm going to use that pro
So
tip whenever I have the LLM write for me. I'm going to tell it to write in the style of Ernest Hemingway. That's
so
that's a good tip.
okay,
Okay, so real quick,
great,
just to recap where we're at.
so much
We're
better.
in like
Yeah.
this agent loop. The goat planner has decided, all right, we're writing a story. You've told it the goal is to write a story, write and review a story, and you've given it the prompt of what to write about. But then we didn't progress through that planner because we're like stuck in
We're
this human
looping.
feedback
Yeah.
loop right now.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just do great, so much better.
So you told it then
And
in from user input, like, okay, now I'm good for you to move on to the
yeah,
next step.
right. So it's finished. It was happy with that. Let's see how that worked in terms of the code. So the write and review agent, as with the normal write and review agent, is annotated with that agent. Um, this, of course, is a Spring component annotation. So that means, for example, it's going to get injected with the magic that is Spring, the story word count review word count. Let's have a look at the first action it will execute. So we've got user input. The Goat Planner says, we have user input from what the user typed in. We can execute this action. Draft story, so it uses the AI interface, but here it returns assess story. Let's have a look at assess story. Assess story is annotated with @state. So when you return something that is annotated with @state or extends the type that's annotated with @state, that is handled specially. So it causes the blackboard to be cleared. It is unlike an agent itself, which is has to be thread safe as like a Spring singleton component. A state now belongs to your process, so other threads can't access it. And it has its own actions which participate in the overall GOAT plan. So
So
the
so
first
it's kind of
thing,
like a subagent, but it's a subagent that has this state that it's trying to achieve before it moves kind of out of that subagent and then continues on to the outer flow or plan of the outer agent.
correct, yes. In fact, my first efforts to implement this were explicitly using subagents. I ultimately realized that's not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is have it within the overall flow and just have this model where you flow through. So now the planner, by the way, to execute this at all, the planner must have figured out that it was possible to get to the end state. So let's have a look at what the planner said it was doing, and that's not the right. Okay, so let's have a look at, no, I've got the wrong window. What did I do? Oh, I collapsed that, and that was a really bad idea. Okay, here we go. So let's have a look at what the planner said. So if we go back to the very, very beginning, we can see the plan was that you would get feedback, you would assess story, and then you would get to this done state review story. So in other words, the original plan was involved that you go through this assessment state and then you get to the done state. So actually, this is probably the original plan. So get feedback, assess, review, and you. So let's have a look at what happens when we get into this state. So now we've got to the assess story. Because this object is now belongs to the agent process and can't get hit by other processes, it's fine for it to have state. So what we do when we're in a state is we give it everything that it needs. Right, it like takes its own baggage and moves forward and doesn't hold on to anything else that was in the blackboard. So here we've got the user input, we've got the story, we've also got these properties. So that we didn't have to pass two parameters, I just put these two things into a properties. As I'm sure Josh would tell me, I really should have used that configuration properties, but given there were only two of them, I couldn't be bothered. But yeah, obviously for more complex things, you could do that. So now within this state, it's going to work in terms of GOAT. So it says I can call get feedback. It's got no additional preconditions. It's expressed in terms of things I've got. So it does that. It uses this wait for command, waits for the user input, off we go. Then obviously the user input is free-form text. We can't like programmatically in code decide whether the user liked the story or not. So we're going to have to assess the user impact. So here the assessment is of type assessment of human feedback. Notice this is a private record. This I find is a pattern that works really well. Often you have these little types that shouldn't be exposed to the wider world. They're just to give your LLM something to return to you at a particular place. So it assesses the story. So, and depending on what it thinks of that story, it now programmatically chooses a state transition. So, if the assessment is acceptable, it goes to done. Done is another stage, and done just has a single action which achieves goal. So the planner is smart enough to look at all of this, unroll all the state transitions, and say, I can get to a goal through these potential state transitions. I actually think
across the sum types and as well, so it knows the inheritance of these as well. So it knows
exactly.
If I get it done or
polymorphism. Yeah. So in this case, we've introduced a stage super interface for what we're going to have there, assess, story, and done. Actually, you know what? I should do this to make it more elegant. So, yeah, I mean, if I say so myself, I think this is the nicest implementation of a state machine pattern that I've seen in these kind of frameworks. Because as I said, you look at LangGraph, anyone who wants more information on this, please read my blog comparing LangGraph and migrating one of their examples. It's just a horrifying mess of magic strings everywhere. Whereas this is expressed totally elegantly in terms of types. It even uses polymorphism. Everything's testable. You can test your individual states, and you get the full benefit of either GOAP or utility planning. This also works really well with utility planning, because if you return an @state class from utility planning, it can force it into a directed flow where it'll go through a bunch of steps. So, it gives you the ability to have that greater directionality that you don't necessarily get with utility planning. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is awesome for integrating human in the loop into the planner, because initially in your planner, you could get to an action that could essentially exit with a state of stuck or something, and then that would allow the agent to have some way to handle the stuck state, and then potentially do a human in the loop kind of interaction to get out of the stuck state. But now you've just got in the planner the ability to add human in the loop interactions to be able to then move to the next step of what the planner wants you to get to.
This is still going to get to the stuck state. So, I mean, it still uses that pattern underneath.
So it's like a nice layer on top of the
it just is very convenient. So the kind of things that this is really good for, obviously human in the loop is really nice, but looping is the only thing at which GOAP isn't awesome. And in fact, GOAP is quite not awesome. For looping, you have to use custom conditions. It tends to be painful.
Before you get to the utility planner, one of the things that Josh and I just did a live stream about last week. Gosh, was that only last week, Josh? Was elicitations in MCP, and one of the things I want to investigate is how we could use elicitations in MCP to be part of the human in the loop cycle within the Embabel planner, which seems totally viable, that a tool could trigger this instead of it being programmatic. So you could go either way or both ways. Maybe you have a tool that does an elicitation, or maybe you have something explicit like this. But either way, it's going to be the same pattern for how you bring human into the loop, which is cool. And then one other thing I wanted to point out is that right now you've got this wait for form submission, and I saw that MCP now has, there's like MCP UI, and there may be a way that we could explore in the future to not just be a text-based interaction, but let's say you're in a web browser, mobile app, whatever, and be able to actually render a form for this human in the loop interaction instead of just it being text oriented.
Yes, so actually we do have a form abstraction. So it isn't, although we have seen it in the shell with the text-based approach, there's enough information in our form abstraction to render it with a UX. So, I can absolutely see that, well, it would not be particularly hard, for example, to write a UI that if it sees a process that's stuck, says, what do you need? And says that this is what it needs. I also totally agree that we should integrate with the more recent MCP work around elicitations. I think that's definitely something that we should align with. But I think there's definitely a value in having our own form abstraction. One thing that I've believed in for a few years now, which I think MCP is getting us towards, is the idea of just-in-time UI. So, I think that we've over-indexed on chat. There's a lot of things where chat isn't great. Like, it's just painful to have a chat agent asking you to type in a number or something when it's just better on a form with validation. Or like, I don't want a chat to type in my zip code to like a chat.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just ridiculous. I want it to be able to be validated. And once it's got my zip code, I want that to help with the address or vice versa. And those kind of things forms work great with. So, I think
Or
this idea of
lookups are one where it's like, why? There's a reason why the MCP inspector is a web UI and not a text, based interface. Is like sometimes these interactions get complex, and having an actual, I don't know, UI is nice.
Yep. So, I think that the notion where, say, you're going through a task rather than using a traditional browser, you are seeing the form fields that are relevant to you. You also don't want to go and re-enter a ton of stuff that it should already know about you in the form. You don't even want to see those form fields that it already knows about. So, I think that can be quite beautiful, where it just prompts you for the appropriate modality and the necessary information.
Absolutely.
I think the elicitations is definitely one. It's a step in that direction.
Yeah, and elicitation. So Josh and I dove into this, and I'll post the blog that I just posted about it. But one of the nice things is in elicitations, it delivers to the client, your agent, a schema of what the user needs to fill in, and that includes type information, that includes descriptions, all that kind of stuff. So it would be totally rational to like create a form dynamically based on the actual data type that was elicited, and only render those things and do it. If they're in a web browser, do it in the way the web browser was. If they're in a mobile app, like do it in the way a mobile app does, and so on and so forth. So
I think this notion of multimodal is really important. This is one of the reasons that we model chat in a completely different way. We don't think of chat as just being a chat session. We think of chat as being an agent process, in which the most probable thing you're going to get is a user message, but it's not necessarily the only thing. Like, some system in the background could push something into that chat, which would change the state of the agent process. But I would imagine, for example, what we have in that form abstraction, which predates elicitation, but I suspect it's got the same information that we would need to create elicitations in a standard manner. Okay, I guess, shall we move on to utility?
Yep.
Okay, let's move on to utility. So here we're going to go to, we're going to talk about both utility and RAG. Let's go to chat actions. So this is the RAG demo project. It is open source, of course. So just go to embabel/rag-demo. And this is interesting because it is both utility and it's chatbot, and also it's got RAG. So let's unpack some of these things. So here you can see this is annotated with @Embabel component, not @agent. @agent has associated with it a planner type, so currently GOP or utility, and it's a scope, right? It's like these set of actions can be used together and it's bounded. Often that's what you want. What if you are happy, for example, to have everything deployed to this platform work through utility to try to address what should happen at any point in time? In that case, you use @Embabel component instead of @agent. So this exports all the actions and any goals, but it doesn't say that the scope is necessarily complete in itself. So this enables us very nicely to write chatbots. So here you can see we've got an action that is responding in a conversation to a user message. So this is something that's new in our planner support as well, which works in both GOP or utility. Actions are absolutely the same in GOP or utility, zero difference. You can see here there's a convenience that it says you can only run if the last thing added to the blackboard was this type. Again, strongly typed. We've put a lot of effort into ensuring that everything is strongly typed. And we've also got note here, we've got can rerun equals true. By default, actions will not run again because you're generally trying to work towards a goal where each action runs once. In this case, we're saying this action can rerun as often as it needs to, but it can only ever run after a user message was published to the agent context. We can have
those are both like metadata provided to the planner, and then the planner gets to decide what it wants to do with those parameters.
Yes, so that, well, if you like, for example, if we have a look here, if we have a look at actions, you will see that we've only got one action here. We've got respond. You can see P conditions, conversation, and last result is user message.
Cool.
So it's just, essentially, it's the same as doing, remember, you can put your own custom preconditions if you want. It's just a way more convenient way to avoid writing, code in a condition method to verify that the last result was action. Let me show you what you could do if you wanted to do that. The other way you could do last input was user message. What you would do is take the context, operation context return, and you would context, can't type today, last result instance of user message, and then you could do pre equals, pretty close. It almost got it, but then it got screwed up about the array last. Yeah, so it's equivalent to that, but it's obviously nicer not to have to do it. But so you can write dynamic conditions that work through methods like this. But let's go back to where we were before. And
so that condition is the foundation of how you provide some additional metadata to the planner so that then it can figure out what to do.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we put a lot of effort into trying to ensure that, syntax sugar like trigger builds on the fundamental underpinnings in a fairly simple way. So actually, as far as the planner is concerned, you can see it's just got this very, very simple last result. So, it doesn't really add a lot of complexity. It's just syntax sugar. Okay, let's also, since we're in the world of utility, we could have multiple actions that respond to a user message. We could have them with dynamic cost. So we could do, for example, cost should be 0 to 1. So we could say cost equals 0.1. Or we could say cost method equals foobar, and we could do at cost double foobar return 0.4. So with an at cost method, you can inject anything that's available at planning time. So for example, you can inject the blackboard here if you want. So you could say 0.1 times BB dot objects, get objects dot size. I mean, I don't know why you would want to do that, but that says your action just gets more expensive the longer your process runs. But where you can think now, obviously this exists within a Spring component. So you can inject things like, let's suppose you've got information about the performance characteristics of different services. This could enable the planner to choose, say, a different action to respond to a user message. You can also, of course, combine chatbots with states, and that's a very natural thing. So, and you can also have, if you want, more specific methods that have additional parameters. So let's suppose foobar doesn't exist, but let's suppose a foobar was in the context. This respond method would take precedence over the other respond method because it's got a more specific signature. And we've done a lot of work to try to express things in terms of core language constructs and conventions versus explicit programming. So how do we know about this conversation thing, and what is a conversation? So Embabel is different from other agent platforms in that a conversation is something that you ask for if you want. It's not something that you always have. So for example, Embabel does not need to compact the conversation, because as you progress through many actions, all you're exposing to the LLM is what that last action chose to expose. It's not like a whole conversation thread history. If you want a conversation thread history, say you want a conversation thread history. And then you get this, you use our conversation interface. So it's mutable, you can add messages, and you can see the roles of the messages, like all the standard stuff. So how do we get that conversation into the context? The way we got the conversation into the context is through this. So we have created an instance of something called a chatbot. There should be at most one chatbot per agent platform, and you define that as a bean, and we give you a very convenient way of doing it. So here we're saying that we're going to use utility AI from the overall platform, and we're going to create a chatbot. If you want, you can say, I want to use this particular agent. I want to use just these actions. So you can constrain it if you want, but very often the simplest way is you just do it for the entire platform. So this is creating our a chatbot that in this case will use this single respond method, but clearly could use fancier things. Respond in this case returns void because it doesn't need to return anything. If it wanted, it could return a state, and you can go through different states, etc. But let's actually just start this up, and it will give us a good example of both the chatbot and of RAG. You can see it loaded a bunch of stuff here out of Lucene. So this is a RAG chatbot. When you do chat under the terminal, you go into this. It's very easy to expose it either through the web, and I'll show you an example of that, or through Discord. We have Discord support as well, so you can put your chatbot in Discord.
So real quick, to get that new agent, the chat agent, was that just built in, or did you have to enable that in some way? The chat shell
It's
command, and then how did that?
the chat command is built into the terminal, but to get a chatbot, all you need to do is these two things. So you need to do chat configuration. You need to define a bean of type chatbot,
Okay, gotcha.
and we
So that's
give
how you.
you this agent process chatbot
Okay.
helper class to enable you to do
So
that.
that this
And
part that what we're looking at right here is in your code, not in Embabel library code.
yes, yeah,
Gotcha.
this is like a recipe, and this is actually documented quite thoroughly. So our documentation is definitely improving a lot. Like particularly if you look at the latest snapshot 031 snapshot docs, they're really pretty good, and it talks through this recipe for creating chatbots. And you need to provide at least one ad action that's going to respond given a conversation context to a user message. Otherwise, nothing will happen. It will just go to dev null. But you can have as many of these as you want, and it will dynamically choose the most appropriate one at each juncture. So, for example, to use that idea of a window before, you could trivially write something where it will respond differently to you outside business hours. When we go into chat, we're going to be talking to this chatbot, and by default, it is possible to configure this to redirect the logging to a file while you're in the terminal chat, because otherwise it becomes a bit impossible. So all it will now do is tell you what LLMs it's calling. So I was wondering what I should do to illustrate RAG, and I thought about ingesting things like the recent Australian social media ban bill. And then I thought, you know what? Let's avoid politics. We all have enough to worry about in the world, so I'll do something that's just purely fun. And also, it's very important, I think, to demo RAG that you choose things where LLMs don't have awesome general knowledge, right? Otherwise, they can just choose to use their own general knowledge.
Yeah.
So what I decided to
You don't
do.
need RAG for things that are in the model generally.
Yes. So what I decided to do is ingest all of the music criticism that was written by Robert Schumann, who was a great mid-19th century composer. Schumann obviously is known to the model, but it doesn't know the hundreds of pages of music criticism that he wrote. Schumann
It's
was
compressed
interesting.
as models do. It's compressed all that knowledge into something that's not going to be as detailed as if you actually rag all that information in.
Yes, so I think so. An American student called Fanny Burney, I believe, in the late 1870s, translated all of his music criticism into English and published it. It's probably, I'm not even sure if it's ever been reprinted. This is something that's not particularly high on LLM's knowledge. So what I did is I took the HTML and I ingested it by converting it to Markdown using Docklink. We do provide, and this is also documented, we provide the ability to use Ticker for ingestion. For really complex things, I do find Docklink works pretty well. It's very, very slow, but it's very capable. I personally have no qualms about the fact that Docklink is written in Python. I think one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing with Embabel is I believe you should choose languages for their strengths. So if you're looking at an ingestion pipeline, that's more a data science problem, and I'm quite open to the idea that you should at least consider using Python for that. If you're building a Gen AI extension of a business application that was written in Java, I think that's a no-brainer. You write it in Java. So, I believe that Embabel should be in Java for precisely the same reason that I'm open-minded about using data science elements in Python. So we've ingested this into a Markdown file, it came from a PDF. The Markdown file is pretty massive, as you can imagine. And then I ingested it using Embabel's ability to ingest Markdown into Lucene. So this is using two modules. It's using the where's the RAG pipeline? It's here somewhere. Let me search for RAG. So we've got the RAG Lucene and RAG Ticker projects here. And this means that it can expose something of type search operations. Again, we define this as a bean ourselves, and this is documented. We possibly, as this part of the framework becomes more mature, we'll probably have a Spring Boot starter for it as well. But for now, like you specify, for example, the embedding service you're going to give to Lucene, the chunker configuration, and the index path. So every time the thing starts up, it loads all the chunks. And actually, before we do this, let's ask it how many chunks it has. It has 7,604 chunks. So, you know, it's large enough that there's some value in the RAG thing here. Let's talk to it.
Real quick before you talk to it, usually when like Josh and I show RAG, we're vectorizing our data from a database into a vector database, and then we're using some vector search across that database. So this is a little bit different of an approach where you're going to do RAG, but you've taken this large document, you've used Lucene to index it, and that's not vectorizing. That's not the same thing, right?
It is vectorizing. Lucene actually does support vector search.
Okay.
So yeah, so this is conceptually the way this search works like any vector database. So the crucial thing here is the search operations interface. So this is extended by a number of things. So if you look at the hierarchy, it's got it's got regular expression, text search, vector search. These are the ones that are just extensions of that interface. And each store can implement as many of these operations as it wants. And then we expose tools that access everything that a store provides. So you can just create your own search operations thing. And when you use the toolish RAG, which I couldn't resist that name. When you use toolish RAG, it will expose as many of those kind of search modalities as you can. So all the things you need to do to get this to work against a vector or any store is create a toolish RAG LLM reference and pass it to your prompt runner using with reference. An LLM reference is also a concept that's new since we last spoke. It's really powerful. What it does is combine a prompt contributor, which puts some content in the prompt, with a bunch of tools. And this solves the problem that when you add in, often tools come in groups, and you need to explain the purpose of this group when you should use it. So if you bring in toolish RAG, you're going to get a bunch of stuff in your prompt that says, these are the tools that are available. This is why you should use them. So it's going to say in the prompt, each prompt, use them to consider the music criticism written by Robert Schumann. And it's going to expose exactly the tools that are relevant to this store. So here, it just looks at what things that store implements. So if it implements vector search, it adds vector search tools. Vector search tools are, essentially tools that sit as a facade on top of the underlying search operations. So it's really very simple to implement your own search over any store. And we also have a Spring vector store, vector search. So if you've got any Spring AI vector store, you can implement, it's trivial to expose that to vector search. So if you just create a Spring vector store, vector search, you can put toolish RAG over that and it will just give you vector search.
Nice.
Let's look at the design of these tools. I did a lot of work on RAG. I would say, to be perfectly honest, RAG has been a massive time sink. It's probably been the single thing in the Embabel world that I've spent, most time that hasn't delivered results. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. RAG is fundamentally the set of things that either don't work or work a lot worse than we've been led to believe. Right? RAG is really imprecise. There's a whole bunch of problems with chunking, lacking context, all that kind of thing. I read a bunch of academic papers and tons of blogs and wrote a fancy pipeline that did things like hide, hypothetical document embedding, all kinds of enhancements, summarization, re-ranking, all this kind of stuff. The results were somewhat disappointing. So eventually I thought, okay, why don't we try a more agentic approach to RAG, where instead of having this pipeline that is enshrined in code, where it basically says to the LLM, hey, have these tools, this is what you can try against this store, and I'm going to prompt you to say how to use it. And the implementation is not only significantly simpler, the performance is significantly better. So let's see here how the RAG works when we say, I am Sforcendo, your enthusiastic guide. What did Schumann think of Meyerbeer? So admittedly, as most of you probably know, I have a PhD in 19th century music history. So this may make more sense to me than other folk. But Meyerbeer was a French opera composer of the mid-19th century he was the Andrew Lloyd Webber of his time. He was immensely commercially successful, and many of his composer contemporaries and critics didn't like his music, and the fact that he was immensely commercially successful kind of enraged them further. Like Wagner's views on many things were changed by, I think, his envy of Meyerbeer. But anyway, I digress. So what did Schumann think of Meyerbeer? Schumann did write about him in these somewhere in these 7,000 chunks. Let's see what the LLM can do. You can see it's telling us what tools it's using here. Right, so here it's quoting directly from what he said in the same chunk. Look at the tools that it searched. So it decided here that actually it makes more sense to do a text search for Meyerbeer than a vector search. Hard to argue with that. But
it did figure out what term to query for. So the LLM decided that part, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And then it's given another tool that deals with structure. So for example, if the search operations implements the result expander interface, you expose the result expander tool. So result expander basically enables you to say, you've got an ID of a chunk you returned. I want to see related chunks to that. So result expander tools here basically say expand the surrounding chunks. So you just go back to that store. This obviously can only be implemented by stores that have the notion of sequence. But this solves the problem of chunk overlap in, I think, a pretty elegant way. Because now maybe it found something where that quote was incomplete. It went back and it got the previous and next chunk and was able to complete the quote. So
that result expander tools, that's in Embabel now with the new RAG stuff. Like this isn't code that end user is going to have to write. This is just going to be when they use that with what's the with RAG thing?
The toolish RAG
with references. With references and the toolish one, that's going to pull in this logic that's going to do that for them. So it's like intelligent RAG across different types of storage systems. And in this case, we're using Lucene as the storage system underneath.
Absolutely. So here, let's suppose you had a Spring vector store. You could do a Spring facade on top of that. Just pass it in here, and it will give you vector search against that. And it'll give you vector search where, for example, it's actually using hide. So where it's instructed to say, for example, I don't have that source loaded, but where it will say use hypothetical document embeddings to generate queries. So it'll give you actually agentic vector search on top of any Spring vector store. Where if you are interested in providing an additional search operations, you can implement as many of those search operation things like vector search, text search, regex search, chunk expander. You implement as many of those as you can, and the result will be the appropriate tools will automatically be enabled. So I think it's a very simple model. It also is something that you can combine. You can have more than one toolish rag reference. You can have them against different stores, and obviously you would need to describe them accurately because otherwise the LLM will not be able to work out what tools to use. But these will be disambiguated under the covers in, so the function that the tool names don't conflict. We presently have support out of the box for Lucene, which is actually, to be honest, it's got vector search. It's really pretty good for a lot of things, and it supports persistence to disk. So, you know, for something like this, where it's, I don't know, a 400-page book, it works great. It also can work in memory. So if you want to spin something up where you don't need to persist it, it will work in memory. We also support out of the box Neo for J. I would say for vector stores, we'll probably largely defer to Spring AI. For there's like, you know, Pinecone or anything like that, we just use the Spring AI thing.
30 different vector stores they support now. So anything that has that vector store interface in Spring AI will just work out of the box with that.
Yeah, one thing we would definitely do our own support though is Postgres, because I think you can combine, like for example, with Postgres, we actually can do the text search because Postgres supports a subset of the Lucene syntax. By the way, we actually tell in our prompt, we tell the LLM what subset of Lucene search syntax the underlying store supports. So, you know, Lucene search syntax is kind of, I mean, it's a bit like Google search syntax. It's kind of the de facto standard. And LLMs can do pretty great if you tell it. For example, with Postgres, we could tell it that the syntax is slightly different and it only supports a subset. It'll do a great job of generating.
Nice. So that's in that like query parameter. It could come up with a query parameter that was a Lucene style query because the LLM knows how to come up with that for Lucene if it knows the dialect that it needs to talk there.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I don't know if I'm tailing the log anywhere here. I thought I was tailing the log. I'm not.
You told it to go to a file, so it wasn't polluting your chat conversation.
Yeah. Well, I thought I was tailing it, but I'm not. Okay, so now let's just have a look again at how we actually respond. So this, so we're just using the AI interface. We get a prompt runner with LLM. We are externalizing our configuration into application.yaml. Guess what? We're using this Spring thing. Josh really must not be feeling his best because normally you mention something like that and Josh just jumps out of his chair. So I'm sorry, man, that you're not feeling that great. But yeah, okay, I'm going to have to say it. This Spring thing's pretty good. So, you know, and actually what I have found is there's quite a few things with our API with its degree of nesting and where YAML works great. So here you can set anything on our LLM options. You can set it using this nested configuration style.
You like that hierarchical structure for these things, and yeah, YAML being hierarchical and object kind of object oriented is the wrong thing to say there, but it is kind of object oriented.
I mean, I think I like a mix of application properties and application.yaml. In this case, I don't think we actually have a properties file. But there are some things that are better. And one of the beautiful things about application.properties is you can go and cut and paste somebody's like Stack Overflow answer that says the relevant property. But yeah, there's definitely things that I think, to my mind, this reads more naturally than it would in properties. So we've got our properties, ragbot properties, and we're specifying objective and voice. So if you have a look at voice, it's persona and max words. Go back to that properties file, which IntelliJ for some reason take me back to. You can say that we've said persona is music guide max words. Let's have a look at chat actions. We are using this capability of using a template. So when we go into with template, that will look for a template under resources prompts. And the template format that we support presently is Ginger. Ginger, Jinja, is the de facto standard in Python. And therefore, there are a ton of prompts that are ready to go in Ginger templates. And frankly, I find it very, very readable for this kind of thing. So let's have a look at what the Ragbot template does. The Ragbot template basically has a couple of includes in it and also says keep your responses down to a certain length. Let's have a look at guardrails and personalization. Guardrails is not that exciting. Personalization brings in the template that responds to the persona and objective. So in this case, the persona that we choose was music guide, and the objective was, in this case, music and shimmer. So again, this is not the only way to do it, but it's quite a nice way to build your prompts.
Yeah, and I think I could see some people looking at this and being like, "Oh, there's a lot of different moving parts here. You've got templates, you've got this like uh, extrapolation to YAML of some properties and some Java code, and it seems complicated." And but as you've shown in some of your blog posts, like the alternative to do the same thing is actually a lot more complicated and a lot less like loosely defined with like string references that you can't validate at runtime and that sort of thing. So it's like
Exactly.
you've built something like that's not a hello world here, and so of course it's going to have a lot more moving parts that you need to weave together, and you've chosen a structured way to do this. So yeah, exactly. Like you can show the hello world way to do all this, and it's going to work. You know, it's going to work. But when you want to get to production, you're going to have some more structure that you can validate. So
Yeah, to be honest, I was tempted, like thinking those things, I was tempted to just demonstrate a prompt right there.
yeah.
But I mean, it's not very
But
useful.
yeah, the value of Embabel is being able to
Yeah,
like do this in a maintainable way
mm,
that you can have a lot of different pieces of validation around. And so I appreciate that you don't just do the hello world demo that works, looks, awesome for a demo, but then people try to get into production, they're like, oh god, that's not going to work. And so yeah, you've
yeah.
shown
So if
that.
we want to do that, we can reduce it to this. And I think you have to say that compares pretty well. Like if you look, say, at writing a chatbot in Python with LangChain, I think this compares really very, very well if you just cut it down to the absolute essentials.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're about real world things. Obviously, you could choose to not externalize. So, again, if you didn't externalize the properties, you could just define it all hard coded. Sure. You'll have no code in it or very little code in it, but it just won't be very useful. So, I want to show things that are useful. I'm just going to switch gears a moment to another chatbot. So you've seen how chatbots work. So this one is a chatbot that is obviously built on exactly the same underpinnings.
Real quick, just to loop back to where we started a long time ago with the chatbot that you showed here was using a new planner in Embabel, which is not the Go planner, which is the one that you started with. It's the new value-based or utility-based. That's what you called it, utility-based, which comes out of game theory and
Yes.
how games are built. So that's using a different planner to give us that like chat style agentic loop across these things. So
in this case, you could absolutely write this as well with GOAT. You could use the GOAT planner, but you would need to specify a goal, right? Because GOAT is not happy to execute without a goal. So, for example, your goal might be a terminate conversation state. So you could express it in GOAT where you're just transitioning back to the present state until there's a transition to the conversation over state. But you know, either of them works really well. The actions will look exactly the same. You could use the same actions in each case, but you know, this kind of, it's just simpler to do it with utility. But you would, if you wanted multiple actions, you could have custom conditions on some of the actions, so they weren't always available. You could have dynamic cost, or you could have extra parameters, which will cause, it's greedy, matching in terms of which action to execute, so it will choose the action that has the most parameters. In this case, we just have one action. Remember that we have an agent process here, so we could also implement actions that listen to something else. And you could push other events into this agent process. I think this is a fundamental difference in terms of how we handle conversations. We see a conversation as an important pattern of interacting with users, but you know, even in a conversation itself, it's something that could exist in a broader context.
Yep. So in the case of like support bots, could you, so one of the things, I was using the United support bot recently, and it should know who I am. It should know my flights that I have coming up in the next week. It should know a lot of these things. And could you build the system here as you could build it in GOAT, but could you build it in the utility planner where in part of the planning phase, you have a respond method that starts with the most minimal information I have. The user said this, and then could you then have overloaded versions of this that would have more information, like, oh, the user is talking about this particular flight, and they have a flight number, and then as the user has specified which flight they actually are talking about, then you move into like the overloaded version of that.
You could do it with an overloaded version, or actually possibly the most elegant way to do that would be to use an at state. And yes, this, I can't wait to implement some examples of that kind of thing. I think it's going to be absolutely awesome. So where it would recognize that you're talking about a particular flight and put you into a state where it will stay until you've resolved that. Yes, I think, I mean, actually, to be honest, chat, I've been trying to find a great solution for directed chatbots for probably about 3 years now. It's a weirdly hard problem to get really good. And I think, you know, actually, ironically, I think we finally solved it without directly intending to solve that problem by solving other problems. Yes. So, I mean, another thing that I was thinking about, in fact, that I even considered writing as an example for this chat was a quiz bot where it would basically adapt to how well you were doing and like go into a state where it could generate harder questions if you were doing okay. And like if you're doing really well, every so 5 correct answers, it could say, hey, you're on a streak, and then go back to the appropriate state. So I think in terms of implementing chatbots, I think the combination of utility planning and states is going to be really, really powerful. But again, if you think in the context of an airline, it may well be that there are certain events coming into that chat. So for example, what if you're talking about flight 607 and you now know that flight's delayed? So you could actually drive a state transition from that. So for example,
from an external system, the
customer, exactly. The passenger is having a conversation and they're really concerned that they won't have time to get to the airport in time to check their bags. What should they do? And so you could give them advice saying, well, please, the default advice might be, well, unfortunately, we do close an hour before the flight, so you may have to make other, can I help you change your booking? But what if there'd been a message, a different event that came into that agent process that said this flight is delayed for 40 minutes? Then you could actually proactively send a message to the customer saying, great news. You should head for the airport now because you're going to be able to catch your flight. Yeah, I think that combination of the long-running agent process, which a conversation represents, and the ability to take anything at all, not just use the messages, that's really powerful. So yeah, expect to see more from the Embabel in the chatbot space. So let's have a look at an actual use of a chatbot that is coming soon. So this is half out there already in the Embabel guide repo, and the other half of it, the front end, is something that we're going to be publishing probably in the next week or so. So here I have a chatbot server running, the guide server. The architecture of that is very, very similar. So it's got chat actions. It knows about users, so it's a bit fancier in that respect. And it's also got another bunch of LLM references. So the LLM references for users include things like, no, I don't want to know about unmodified list, I want to know about references. So it includes references that are loaded from, I'm not doing a good job of finding the code here. Here we are. LLM references providers from YAML file. So if you look at the references.yaml file, this is a way of serializing LLM references. So we're using Jackson in a way where you can specify the fully qualified name, so you don't have to put any special hierarchy annotations. You can define a new subtype of LLM reference provider. And here we're specifying, using the Embabel code module, a GitHub repository. So it will expose tools against the GitHub repository. We're also
real quick, so that's building on a feature that's unique to Embabel from what I've seen, which is the ability to add tools that are tied to an instance of a domain object. And so when you have, am I getting that right? Like this is the attaching tools onto a class?
Yes, that is definitely a pattern that we advocate and thinks works great. In this case, the tools, yes, they are. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. They're a domain object. They're just a domain object that we ship, and this comes in the Embabel agent. Yeah, but it is a domain object. So we're going to expose tools on this that enable you, for example, to search for particular things in that code base. So these are the tools that support coding agents. So we provide that. They're not MCP. They're all written on the JVM because obviously it performs really well for this and it's very convenient. So when we set these references up, you'll see, let me just restart this and you'll see its log output. So it's got a bunch of LLMs available, which is detected. Now look, it's cloning these GitHub repositories. And so it clones them and we'll clean them up when it's finished. So it's just putting them in a temporary file.
Was it the toolish rag thing that was doing the
No, this uses exactly the same concept, but it's a distinct thing. So these are also LLM references. So there's a concept of LLM reference that is higher level than other. It is, here are a bunch of tools, and I'm going to tell you how to use these tools. And I'm going to do naming disambiguation. So your tools will not conflict with someone else's LLM references. Toolish rag is an LLM reference, and these references are an LLM reference. So now we have a chatbot that understands a bunch of these repositories. So for example, it's got, actually I should put the guide repository itself. That would be kind of quite funny to have it exposing its own code base. And now it can choose to use these tools as well as vector RAG. So in this case, we've got vector RAG. We've vectorized our documentation and a README in a couple of my blogs. So we've got, let's see how many chunks we've got in our database. And this is using Neo's vector capability, but it also supports full text search. Okay, so we have 282 chunks. So there's not quite as much in our documentation as there is in Schumann's collected music criticism.
You got more
okay, so
more documentation to write to get up to.
Yep. Well, you know what? I honestly think we're doing pretty damn good with the documentation. Like, for example, if you look at our documentation on the chatbot stuff, it's really good. Okay, so let's try our chatbot. So this is not going to be the default when we ship, but what we're currently playing with, because it keeps Jasper and myself endlessly amused, is a chatbot personality, Jesse Pinkman from Breaking Bad. He's, I don't know, he just makes every day brighter. But if you want to change that, if you want to change that, the default is adaptive, and that will listen to how you talk and try to sound like you. Some people love it. Some people find it a bit creepy. But we're also going to have one that probably tries to sound like me. But you will be able to change, and the default will not be Jesse.
I was going to say we need a Josh Long one persona on there.
Yeah, okay, we can totally do that.
There's plenty of training data on that.
Yeah, so, and I mean, it's basically we need a file like this for Josh Long. Maybe you can send a pull request for this, Josh. I think you got a bit of a profile there, man. People would respond to it. Okay, what is GOAT used for in Embabel? So you can see calling the LLM, it's decided to do text search, which is interesting. But you know, we're in its hands, and let's see. So okay.
So when you say it decided, this is because this is exposed as tools to the LLM. So then the LLM is deciding which tools out of the many that it has available for how it wants to accomplish the goal that you've given it.
Yeah. So we as developers did not need to know about the details of that. All we do is expose toolish RAG, and we give it a Neo4j backed store. And so toolish RAG says, oh, this store supports vector search, it supports full text search, it supports structure expansion. So we know it is automatically exposed those tools. So, okay, let's ask it, how do I write a chatbot? And it hopefully should have our latest documentation, which should do a good job of this.
Because it fetched it from GitHub in this case.
Yeah. Okay, that it used the wrong tool. This is a prompt engineering problem. So, okay, maybe needs to be told more aggressively to use tools. So now it's looking in the documentation to probably get a better response. Okay, so now this one's exactly right. So, you know, one of the challenges that you get when building chatbots, whether you're using our technology or anybody else's, is it's inherently less deterministic. Remember our fundamental idea that you break steps up into multiple, break flows up into multiple steps, and those steps have small focus prompts. That is inherently harder to do with chatbot, because you're getting a conversation thread that's growing, and also typically you have a bunch of stuff that you've got to say in the chatbot. You need a pretty broad range of tools. You don't get to narrow it down so much. So therefore, your level of determinism is a little bit lower. Can you find me an example of a real chatbot? So now it should actually look at the find files, chat.java. It won't find chat.java. So now it's actually looking at the RAG. It's actually walking the RAGBot repo, and it's found ragbot application, found chat configuration. I think it's probably going to come back with something pretty good. So the agentic RAG definitely works a lot better, right? I mean, that actually did a pretty damn good job of finding that. So what does can I specify on the action annotation? What's that annotation for? Okay, so it's doing a document text search for the add action annotation, and it found that, yeah.
Was that correct?
Yep, that is 100% correct.
So
Yeah.
just to unravel this, what we're looking at
mm,
is a chatbot that is powered by the Embabel, the new utility planner, which has done RAG or has the ability to do RAG on the Embabel documentations and samples repos and other things that it pulled from GitHub into its Neo4j, in this case, data store to do the RAG against that. Did I get that summary right?
That's pretty that's almost exactly right. So the thing is, however, the GitHub stuff never goes into Neo. So essentially, we've got two different kinds of references. We've got the toolish rag reference. So this one, which is against the Neo store. And we've also got the other references, which are built from, parsing this YAML file and saying, hey, I can find an LLM reference provider for each of these things. So you can put as many of these as you want. It will call them appropriately. We're actually also looking at, ingesting not only our own documentation, but maybe some Spring documentation, some stuff on modern Java. So it will, help people understand best practices.
And what you're showing here is just a sample of the Embabel RAG system and the ability to define essentially different strategies for RAG depending on what type of data and what type of storage system you're doing that RAG against.
Yeah. So conceptually, as we think about it, there is no real difference between RAG and anything else. It's all tool based, and it's all based on the LLM reference. So, for example, if I have a Neo4j store, what can I do against that? I can do vector search, I can do full text search, I can do structural expansion. So, for example, if my schema is well defined, I can say, find me the parent section of this chunk, find me the previous chunk, find me the next chunk. So I support all of those things, and toolish rag will detect that and expose it. With the other references like GitHub repository, that actually provides a bunch of file-based tools. So it provides, like you saw it, walk the directory tree using that. So the notion is that an LLM reference combines prompt information with a set of tools and also handles disambiguation. So you don't have to worry that your tools are coming into conflict. It will handle the namespacing. And you can just mix and match these as you want in using the prompts. So, when we go back to chat actions here, you can see that we're doing with reference for the toolish rag and with references for all of the other stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I would, in this case, I think it's unlikely we'd want more than one, like vector full text store. So we just put, as we ingest whatever we just choose to ingest, it will all go into Neo. But, potentially we might add more APIs, and we might add more GitHub repositories, and they don't go to Neo. If we look
so as an example, like S3 just added their like auto vectorization thing. So we could have a way to do that with references against the like S3 vector store. Like Like
No.
it's going to be the same from the user perspective. They're just going to say like with reference in some S3 like bucket or something like that, and it's going to then know the capabilities that are available against that thing and know how to do RAG against that thing.
And also, because it realizes it only has the RAG tool available, sorry, it only has the vector tool available. And if you give it that hint to try hide, it will try harder to generate different queries, hypothetical document embeddings. So, if it knows the set of things available to them, it will use it hopefully in an appropriate manner. So if we look at this
It seems
last one
like in
here,
some ways you've developed like this abstraction of a RAG that supports the different types of RAG that you may need to implement depending on the how the data is stored and what you can do against that data.
absolutely. Yeah. And so presently we have the notion that there are four things that are kind of fairly universal: text search, vector search, content expansion, where you say, I've got a piece of content that I need to see more context around it, and also regex search. So, for example, some of the file-based things. But one of the things that we'll definitely add is the ability to people to add their own new kinds of things and follow that pattern to add tools. But from a programmer's end users programmer's perspective, it's actually, I think, very, very simple in terms of like all they need to do is bring in toolish RAG. So when you see that with reference toolish RAG, basically that says, I'm telling you what this reference is named and what it's for, and giving you a store. Expose the best tools you can possibly expose against that store, and you can rely on it to do that. One other thing I would like to show from references is a different kind of thing, which is an API reference provider. This works for analyzing the class path. So for example, if we say what methods are available on toolish RAG, well, let's see if it goes to the docs. No, it's decided to look on the class path, and it's also decided to look at the code. But it has that ability to find up-to-date information on the class path.
I'm curious about the like that's cool. And is there a reason that in a chatbot you may not want to expose that capability, or can you limit it to just like the set of domain objects that you want the users to actually be able to perform tools on? Like I don't want people exploring all the
everything
classes
here
on
is
my.
explicit. Everything here is explicit. So if we look at chat actions, we're adding the references for that the user should see and the toolish RAG, which is the whole of that documentation corpus. But you could, for example, depending on the user's permissions, give them additional toolish RAG on like private. So for example, we're looking to get this chatbot UI in the hands of one of our customers, Flight Centre, who are a global travel brand here in Australia. And I could imagine that they might want to add, say, from the class path, some of their own, proprietary code, and they might want to add some of their own internal documents. But that may, conditionally be available to particular users. But we're not exposing anything that wasn't absolutely explicit. So references for user, in this case, we could add more references for that particular user, but we don't. But we're only adding what is specified in that YAML file. We're not giving the ability to get.
Even though you could perform that query in your chatbot, this is nothing that they couldn't call through a prompt. It's not like we didn't provide some backdoor to them to functionality that wasn't available through another means. So still you only want to provide APIs and or tools essentially to this thing that the users should be able to call directly. So in some ways, it's like yeah, we're gonna essentially lock down to this user the things that the user should be able to access. We're going to preserve user context so that we're not exposing backdoors here.
Oh, no, no, no. We are absolutely not exposing backdoors. So, we've still got, what is the core Embabel concept? The core Embabel concept is this idea of breaking things into actions. In this case, at this point in time, we only have a single action to respond. But each time that executes, it is only exposing, as we recommend in actions, the references, the tools that are explicitly granted to that interaction. So yeah, there's it, and bear in mind this doesn't have to be used in a chatbot. Like if you want to include, for example, RAG functionality in anything else, or if you want to even have a coding agent help a coding agent, you can expose file tools. One other thing I should show here, by the way, is that we export many of these tools over MCP. So, for example, if I run Claude locally here, you can see that we have somewhere here Embabel dev. Okay, what methods can I use from the prompt runner in Embabel?
So you've hooked up your Claude
And
desktop to your local running process for that exposes an MCP server, which you can turn on or off if you want with Embabel. And then Claude desktop can connect to that MCP server and then be able to use these tools there in the same way that you showed it through your own chatbot.
yep, see that it called the Embabel agent find class by simple name. You can see the log here, calling tool find class by simple name, name prompt runner. You can also hook it up with Claude Code. So if you look at the README, the guide repo is public. And if you look at the README, it tells you exactly how to set it up with Claude Desktop and Claude Code. So yeah, if you're working on an Embabel application, you will find that that's very good. The reason it'll be interesting to see to what extent people consume this through something like Claude Desktop using the MCP tools. To be honest, there is a value in having our own chatbot because we have control over the prompts. Like with MCP, although there is a prompt concept that's kind of a bit clunky to get into it, and what we might actually do.
If United exposed their chatbot support bot as an MCP server that I could just plug into Claude.ai, I totally would. Like 100%, I would rather use their interface and than United's terrible interface. So
Yeah, no, that I think that that's definitely a very important modality, and we do support the ability to provide MCPs to expose agents as MCP tools. So we could actually expose a stateful agent that had, for example, a state transition mechanism, so we could do all that stuff that we mentioned. But yeah, I think it's obviously greatly reduces the barrier to entry to be able to use it through a tool like Claude Desktop if somebody's already got that.
Rod, I lost you. Am I still? Is it my side?
Hello?
Lost your audio.
Should still. Is that a problem?
Maybe it's just on my side.
Can you hear me, Josh? Put your hand up. Yeah, Josh can hear me.
Josh says that he can hear you.
Yeah. So with Claude Code, you can also use this. So for example, if I run Claude /MCP, and you can see that we've got the Embabel server and we can view tools and
okay.
you can see all this.
Maybe I can. I think my output switched to a different device for some reason on this thing.
So the Embabel guide repository, it's out there in open source. This we're currently thinking about how to package
Maybe we hit
this
some
hub.
cap on. It's like we've gone an hour and 40 minutes. StreamYard's like that's enough for James to listen to. I don't know.
Probably enough for everybody to listen to. Though I must admit, I always love talking about this stuff, and I love talking to you guys. So I can keep going. So we're still, with respect to this particular interface, which also integrates connecting to showing our documentation. We are still deciding how to package it. We'll probably package it as a Docker container, because obviously you need to be running Neo, you need to be running the front end, which is Node and React, and you also need to be managing the data. So we'll probably just put that as a Docker container. And just to show where we are with respect to the docs, our docs are really pretty good now. So this is the snapshot documentation. So for example, remember how we talked about what you have to do to build a chatbot? Guess what? We've got pretty good documentation about building a chatbot. If you want to know, for example, about the state mechanism, we've got that really covered very well as well. So, the documentation is always and will always be a work in progress, but it's actually getting pretty good, and we are really, really making an effort to keep it up to date on our latest features.
Cool. Well, I think I'm back and can hear you again, so that's good. Thank you, Rod. Anything else you wanted to cover? We'll share those links and.
Well, I mean, there's been so much that we've been doing recently that there's a lot, but I think we got some of the most important things. So the importance of utility AI, why that broadens what we can do. What I think is a very elegant state mechanism, which is absolutely preserves all our values of determinism and type safety. And also the fact that we've got now a really nice RAG abstraction that we can extend to make different stores really, really easy to use. And of course, chatbots. So yeah, I think the directed flows and chatbots can work really, really well with the state mechanism.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you, Rod. That was awesome, and lots of good stuff in there. So, yeah, as Josh says, this is awesome, and happy holidays, everyone. Hope you all have some good time off, and dive into Embabel and let us know, and let Rod know what you think. Anything else to wrap up?
No, look, thank you for the time, and yeah, I always like this audience as well as my co-presenters. So yeah, Merry Christmas, and feel better, Josh. You must be feeling quite under the weather there.
Yeah, hopefully Josh feels better and gets some good time off. And yep, we'll be back on the road, Josh and I, next year to show off all this goodness and help developers get up to speed. So yeah, we'll post links and yeah, thank you all for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rod.